So last night we saw an awesome presentation led by Mr. Groce, and he also did some very interactive demonstrations. One of them inspired by our very own Chris Miller. I was able to get additional vocabulary that I can use in my classroom, as well as extend the sun, moon, and earth relations. So I'm here with Mr. Grossman. How you doing?
Good. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
So I have a few questions for you that I've been dying to ask. The first one is, what led you to work in planetariums?
I started out like everyone else as a child. And when I was 8 years old, I received for Christmas the Golden Book of Astronomy, a little paperback book. And in it, I read about, of course, eclipses and Halley's Comet was in there. And I just wanted to be able to see Halley's Comet. So I would go to bed at night and I would pray. I would say, "Dear God, please let me live long enough to see Halley's Comet." And of course I did in 1986. But I grew up originally as a street kind of urchin kid in the streets of New Orleans. And my folks bought a farm when I was 12. And so then I became a farm kid. And I was delighted by it because we had no city lights. And every night I spent sleeping under the stars. My mother had to call me in at night. She said you were going to catch the death of cold and all those other things. But I slept with my dog outside, and I learned to love the night sky. So I built my first telescope when I was 12. I was always interested in astronomy. My first visit to a planetarium wasn't until I was 17 years of age, and when I saw that you could reproduce the sky and you could talk about it, I fell in love with the medium and so on. Then I worked, I volunteered first, and then they hired me to be a console jockey to run the planetarium as a summer job. And then I earned my way through college, teaching college labs, because I was the only one who knew how to operate the planetarium. The professors didn't want to do it, so I taught all the labs as an undergraduate. And then I went off to teach and do graduate work, and it never occurred to me that I could actually make a living in a planetarium. But I remembered that I was always happiest teaching in this environment. And a position came open in 1973. I'm really old. In Kingsport, Tennessee, and became director of that planetarium for a number of years. And then I moved to Jacksonville, Florida, where I was director of the Breast Planetarium for 12 years. All my planetariums that I operated were very successful. The huge attendance. They actually made money, which is something unusual. And everyone wanted to know what I was doing program-wise and so on to make these planetariums successful. And it got to be a point where I was doing more and more consulting work. And that's when I broke off to form my company, Helping Planetariums Succeed.
Now you are the president of Helping Planetariums Succeed LLC. Tell us about how your work extends across the nation.
Well, in Helping Planetariums Succeed, it's a consulting company. I work helping with architects and engineers in designing new facilities. Our motto is that we're here to make new mistakes, not old ones, and that's what we try to do in planetarium design. But also in renovation of planetariums, existing planetariums, to teach these old dogs new tricks and to bring new technologies into them. And sometimes I help with programmatically, just helping identify the best way for planetariums to reach their audiences, to increase their student involvement, and so on. So I'm working currently on planetariums in California and Iceland.
Wow. So, now you've worked on many projects, and you've created many programs, and I love the Firefall program. Can you tell us the story of Firefall?
Firefall began, I was very fortunate. I was 16 years of age when the Leonid meteor shower happened in 1966. And I was out on a farm and it was dark. and the that it was a precursor to that day. I actually saw some meteors falling during the day. I saw smoke trails. It's very rare to do that, and I saw that. And that night, it really was looking like it was raining meteors. It was frightening, and it was incredible. As estimates range from 10,000 to 100,000 meteors per hour. And I was fortunate enough to witness that, and that put inside me a real need to understand meteors, meteorites, and the space environment around us. So that was a seed. And then when I started operating planetariums, I think I wrote Firefall originally in 1982, long time ago. And that planetarium I produced through a grant, a National Endowment for the Arts grant, and it was distributed to many planetariums across the country. And it was very popular. And this is the old slide-based shows and so on. George Fleener, who had actually run the show many times, it was his favorite show. And so when he formed his company, Geographics, the first show he wanted to produce as an astronomy show, he said, "Phil, can I have the script?" And I said, "Sure, take the script." And so he worked with it, he and several planetarium people, and I was surprised they left it largely untouched. I was honored then they asked me to narrate part of it, but I wanted to communicate the love of the sky and some sort of connection to these falling objects. One of my favorite lines is in the end of the show. It says, "If rock and dust could speak, what tales these meteors would tell, only to die unnoticed in a fraction or a second of light." So next time you see a falling star, make a wish and mourn its demise. That line to me was the first thing I wrote in that show, that last part. And it came to me when I would watch a meteor shower or watch meteors. And so the show wrote itself from that.
That's a great program. I recommend everyone to see Firefall. Now, do you have any future projects that you're...
Well, planetarium projects, not show projects, not really. I have, in my time, I'm old. I've written about almost 200 planetarium scripts in my time. Other people have, I've given them away to people to reuse and reproduce. I don't have anything immediate, but if you see George Fleener, tell him I'm ready to do another show. But
Nice. Well, we saw him last night, so we'll make sure to send that message.
Okay.
Also, we're here for this historic event that's happening tomorrow. They call it the Great American Eclipse. What are some of the activities that observers should certainly include in this event?
Well, let's talk first about all the partial phases. Most of the nation is going to be able to see this as a partial eclipse. And even as a partial eclipse, there's a lot to see and a lot to experience. Obviously, the closer you are to the center line, the closer you are to the path of totality, the more the sun will be blocked. But at around approximately 60 or 70% of the sun as it's being blocked, the light of the sun, or the image of the sun, is getting smaller and smaller. And what people will first thing will start noticing is that the shadows will start sharpening. And the skyline, the buildings, the houses, the trees, the people will look more remarkably different, because instead of having soft shadows, everything will be hard edge. And it'll add it's kind of like adding a high contrast filter to your eyes. And that is a wonderful thing. Watching the partial phases is also proof that the universe is in motion. We have this tendency to think that we're this egocentric view. We're tied to the planet Earth, and everything goes around us. It's an old view. Ancient men always felt that way, that the sun went around us, and that the moon goes around us, and the stars go around us. Of course, we know that's not true. What really is happening is that we're stuck on a nice, wonderful round ball called the Earth, and then it's turning, and it's changing our point of view, and the result is it makes everything out in space look like it's moving. But there are times when we can actually experience the motion of other objects, and we don't, even though it's possible in an evening to actually see the moon move. If you look at it and come back out in an hour and look at its placement against the stars, even with your naked eye, you can tell that the moon has moved slightly. But with an eclipse, you have a front row seat to the motion of the moon as it moves in front of the sun. And for me, the thing that's I find, it's kind of an emotional, unscientific thing, is I recognize that I'm not in control. We, as human beings, we have a tendency, we think we're in control. We have our little, we're in control of our smartphones, and we're in control of our cars, and we're in control of our lives. But the truth of the matter is that none of that is true. The closest thing to me when we talk about totality and the eclipse and so on, they ask me, what is the emotional response? If anyone has ever been in a car accident, and I hope no one ever has that experience, but if you've ever been in an accident, one of the things that's most disturbing about being in an accident is that you don't have any control. That's why they're called accidents. and there's this fear that comes over you. They realize I am not in control. No power on earth is going to change this event. And when you look at an eclipse, I think that's what I think unconsciously what happens with people, because for all of the technology, for all of the wealth of this planet, there is no way, in any way, that we can stop this event. And it starts happening. You can understand why ancient people would sacrifice people to make it go away and throw them in volcanoes and so on, because it is a frightening experience. It's like being in a traffic accident in really slow motion. Now, I know that doesn't sound very attractive, but if you're into thrill rides, there's no greater thrill than that.
Also, there's plenty of young people that are going to be watching the show, and many have a passion for science, have a passion for astronomy. What advice would you give those young astronomers?
Learn your math. The math is the language of science. There's an old adage in science that if you can't measure it, you really don't know anything about it. And there's a lot of truth in that. And mathematics is the tool that allows us to measure things, allows us to calculate things, and to test our ideas, our hypotheses, and so on. I think the other thing is that if I had my way, I would make every science genius take art, and I would make every art genius take science, because I feel strongly that we need both, and I think that we need to understand that what good it is. I understand the eclipse scientifically. I understand what's actually happening, but its value is really how it affects me emotionally, how it makes me realize how lucky I am, how blessed I am to be on this planet, and being born in this time to be able to see it. And for me, and for everyone on this planet, the reason why I think science is important, why I think art's important, is because we're all witnesses, and to the human condition and to the universe, and we record its impact, whether it be through art or science. We're witnesses. And I'm often asked by students, do you believe that there's extraterrestrial life? And my answer is, I sure hope so, because I'd hate to think that God put all his eggs in this basket we got going here. But the point is I don't know. And either way, let's suppose if there's life out there and so on, then what a wonderful idea to be able to think that maybe not my generation, maybe not even your generation as students, but someone will discover that. And it's likely to happen sooner, I think, than later. And how that's going to change us to recognize, just as the eclipse reminds us we're not in control, and then we no longer own the universe. We're going to have to figure out how to share it. That would be great. But let's suppose that we are alone, that we are the only sentient beings in the entire universe, the only people who, or only creatures who have enough intelligence to look up and ask the question, how did this get here? Why is it here? And so on. If that's the case, then every human being, every student, has an obligation to make the most of that and to learn as much as we can and to be students of the universe. And I believe that's our moral obligation to do that. In that sense, I think everybody is a scientist and should be a scientist.
You have a passion, and that's evident. You have a passion in the planetarium industry. I have a passion for teaching, and many watching this show have passion as well. And when you have passion, there's nothing that can be overcome. Well, there's nothing that you're not willing to do to overcome. Tell us the story about Chris McCall.
Oh, and I'm so glad you said that, because if I had to say what was the key to my success, it was that, and I'm glad that I care passionately about the subject. I care passionately about the people who are learning, and that has gotten me through more things. It has given me the ability to stay up at night and learn more, or to work a little harder for my students or whatever. When I was very blessed to have met a young lady when she was 14 years of age. Her name was Chris McCall. She was legally blind. She was able to see light and dark, and she had a small little instrument that she could hold up to her eyes, that she could focus things sharply to compensate for her clouded corneas and so on. But she could not drive, and there was some question as to whether or not how well she could function. She came to the planetarium to volunteer, to be one of my showrunners. At first, to be honest, I thought someone was playing a pretty bad joke on me, because here was someone sending me, a seeing impaired human being, to do something that requires usually pretty good visual acuity. And but she was so earnest and so sincere. So I took her into the planetarium, and I showed her the console, and I showed her how to operate it. And I said, what I'd like you to do is practice this. I'd like you to learn the stars, and then I'd like you to put together a brief oral tour of the sky for me. You can take as long as you want. I've done this with other students and volunteers, and sometimes they take weeks and months. And then when you're ready for me to see it, we'll do it. 3 days later, I get a knock on my door, and it's Chris. And I said, so how's it going? She says, well, I think I'm ready. I went, what? I wouldn't have been ready in 3 days. So I said, okay. So I go down there, and I said, so show me the sky, tell me what you know. And she gave me the best sky tour I had ever seen by anybody. And I was just aghast. She was a natural, and she worked really hard, and she was precise, and she overcame that adversity. She became my best showrunner. She later went off to school. She got a degree in television and film, and she came back to the planetarium, and I hired her as my show producer. Very soon after that, she was so valuable I couldn't keep her. I got her a job in Nashville at the Sudekin Planetarium, and I knew the person there, the director there, and I said, I'm going to send you Chris McCall, just the best person I know for this job. And I said, but I want to tell you one thing. She's legally blind. And there was this long silence on the phone. And I said, no, do me a favor, do the interview. I said, her mother's going to take her up to Nashville, drive her up there, and she did the interview. I saw this director 10 years later. He's at another science institution, and he went up to me and he said, "Phil, that was the best hire I ever made in my entire life." And what it was a lesson to me on many levels, and that is that I think students, children, people can overcome almost any adversity if they have passion. And Chris had more passion. I wish I could, she could just, bottle it up and give it to people, because it was one of the reasons that she was so successful. And if you love something enough, you'll be good at it. And I think that that's part of being a success, is just finding something that you love, and just learn as much as you can about it, and I guarantee you're going to be successful.